what's your voice, bro? But how do you speak to yourself? And I'm looking at these fucking sausage finger hands. And I'm like, these hands, bro, these hands are real, dude. Like, these hands don't work. And I grabbed my body. And for the first time, I was like, this body is the body that has gotten you through this. In the ayahuasca ceremony, there is it's like a cadence of chanting / singing between the facilitators. That's made to take you in these like ups and downs. And one of the ones were like, it was like really like, it was super cool. And I started just kind of like, I was kind of, tripping. And I started being like, it's cool. And as I was doing that, I was like, man, Julio, the facilitator, I was like, bro, what a cool voice, man. I wonder how he's developed that voice, how he's developed how to do that. And then I started telling myself, what's your voice, bro? How do you, you've developed your voice as a speaker, but how do you speak to yourself? Like, if you're going to develop that voice, and I started going through this, like, how do you talk to yourself? Like, how you should talk to yourself? Like, this is how you should talk to yourself. Like, talk to yourself the way that you talk to others. And, like I started going down that tree, and as I'm like pumping myself up, I like look at my hands. I'm like, cause you've done real shit, dude. Like, these last 6 months have been fucking intense, man. Like what else do you need to be able to talk yourself into, right? Like, I'm like riling myself up, and I'm like, you've done real work. And at a certain point I look up at my hands and I go like, these hands that don't work, bro. and right when I look at my hands, I look like I had giant hands, right? I look like I had giant hands. And that's really significant to me, because if you see my hands, they're objectively tiny little hands. Like, I have small hands. I've always made fun of myself for that. And I'm looking at these fucking sausage finger hands, and I'm like, these hands, bro, these hands are real, dude. Like, these hands don't work. And I'm like, these are the hands that have done the work, and like, fuck whether you think they're small, like, it doesn't matter. Like, they can handle it. This is a man's hands. And I'm like, and they've been taking care of this body. And I grabbed my body. And for the first time, I was like, this body, man, this body is the body that has gotten you through this, right? Like, these shoulders, man, these shoulders have sucked at surfing for 15 years, but finally fucking figured it out, man. You've really like gone through that. These legs, like, these legs ran a half marathon last year, bro. Like, just like pumping myself up, and like realizing at that moment that I had never loved my body. I've always had a weird thing about, like, I want a little bit hunchback, I got tits, I got like a pear shape, I got skinny legs, right? Like, I've just never loved my body. And I've always been very self-deprecative towards my body. And for the first time, I started grabbing my body, just like loving it, right? Like, the way that you like grab your woman, there's like, you good, like you, like, yeah. But like really enjoying myself on a physical way. Just like really holding on to it. And that was the first time I ever felt that. And then as I love that body, I was like, and you know what, who else I love? It's that guy that chickened out about standing up for that kid when he knew he should have, right? Like, I started thinking of all the moments that I was ashamed of myself in my life. And I started telling myself, that same person that did that thing that you're ashamed of is the same person that's accomplished all these things. So you love that person too. Right? Like, yeah. And that was a seminal moment in self-worth for me, right? Like, that second night of that ayahuasca trip was a huge moment of like loving myself. And then by like the third night, I was completely redefining my relationships to my wife. Like, I had literally gone to ayahuasca to be like, should I get divorced or not? That was my question, right? And at that point, I immediately started redefining my relationships. Like, oh, okay, no, if I approach it from a sense of self-worth, then there's way more of this than it was my fault that I was giving it credit for, right? Like, that I could really just like improve on my side. It's not that what's wrong with her not loving me the way I want it to be, right? Like, it started there, and it completely reframed my relationship with my mom too. I went through this like regression of understanding everything my mom had to give up to have a third kid, and like honoring her for that, and eventually getting to the point where like, but you know what? it was fucking worth it for you because I know our relationship and I know how much you love me. And, you know, like I completely regressed through this like whole mother wound and really like healed it in a beautiful way. So those two moments, like that was after that, from henceforth, I have very easily been able to identify, oh, am I approaching this from a place of, am I valuing myself? Or am I approaching myself from a place where I'm devaluing myself? And since then, shit has worked out way better.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
That self-talk is
Huge.
so important.
Yeah.
And it's loving, as you mentioned, loving all those aspects about yourself, loving that past self that even if you were ashamed of him at the time, loving that person, loving every single part of yourself. And I see that just as a part of me too, is like all the challenges, all the things that we've had in the past, all the challenges in the present, they're all here for us. And when we change that voice inside of our head to see the value and love that, the challenges incorporated, it's just it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. It was the thing that I didn't know I needed, right? Like it's the thing that, you know, they say ayahuasca makes the subconscious conscious, right? Like it was the thing that needed to be brought up to my conscious level. Yeah, man, it's profoundly changed everything about me. Being able to, not saying that it was just that moment, right? Like it's a compounding journey of it all. You're asking about stories of how it's changed me. I'll start off with something as simple as, because I was overmothered, I'm like the first guy that when my wife, right, would be like, make sure you do this, be like the first guy to be like, fuck you, I don't need to, you know, like, no shit, I'm gonna do that, right? Like I'm like the guy that when people are like, when my mom tells me, you know, I'm going to go on a flight and she's like, oh my God, be safe. I'm going to be like, yeah, thanks. Yeah. I was thinking about being unsafe and dumb. You know, like that's where my trigger goes. And it's terrible in a relationship with a woman, right? Like that lives with you, who just like, you know, she's coming from her own stuff. And sometimes like I know how to cook, right? Like I just made you an awesome snack, right? She's taught me how to cook and be great in the kitchen. And I feel like I'm a really fucking good in the kitchen. And yet when she corrects me on like, why are you cutting it that way when you should cut it this way? I'm like, motherfucker, you know that's tasty. You know I've made this recipe and it's fucking delicious. Ever since that flip switched, when that happens, sometimes I get triggered, but most of the time I'm just like, oh, okay, she's just coming at this. She's not devaluing me by saying this. So I don't have this like innate trigger reaction that then 3 days later turns into like me being an asshole. And a month later turns out to like, she hates me, you know, like, right? So the idea of reacting with unnecessary corrections, and not being triggered in a way that then subconsciously makes the next interaction with someone unpleasant, that then makes them triggered to then subconsciously whatever, which happens the most with people that you live, like a brother, sister, and or wife, right? That stuff has changed profoundly, right? Like I'm really able to just like listen to that and be like, yeah, cool, no, I got it. And like continue, or just be like, oh, okay, cool. Tell me more. Why would I hold the knife this way instead, you know, and allow myself to approach from a place of curiosity instead of judgment and defensiveness.
It's because you have that inner confidence inside, right? Because before that confidence wasn't necessarily there, so it would cause that trigger. But now you have that confidence inside yourself. It just doesn't have that same effect.
Yeah. Before that voice of like, you're not worthy would hear that and then bubble up to the surface, be like, see, I told you, motherfucker, you're not worthy. You know, nowadays that voice, the moment that voice shows up, I'm like, I know who you are.